Hello, folks. We meet again in another episode of the Jakarta-Post special interview. My name is Adisti, a managing editor at the Post, and I'm here with Dzulfiqar, our business journalist. How are you, Dzulfiqar?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope you're fine as well.
I'm fine, thank you. Today we have the honor to have a conversation with Agustin Carstens, the general manager of Bank for International Settlements, also known as BIS. Agustin is a renowned economist. Before leading the bank in 2017, he was Mexico's central bank governor. He also once served as Mexico's finance minister and previously held various positions at IMF. BIS is known as the central bank of the world's central banks. Today, we will discuss about the bank's growing role in Asia Pacific, the current global inflation trend, and the hype surrounding digital currency. Hello, Agustin. It's lovely to finally meet you. How are you?
Very well, Adisti. Thank you very much for having me in this program. It's a privilege to connect with Indonesia through the Jakarta-Post, especially in this year that is really significant, where Indonesia takes center stage in the world economy, hosting the G20 and other important engagements. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, indeed. This is a very exciting time for us, Agustin. So awesome. So let's get into our discussion. Can you tell us more about BIS? I mean, we know IMF, we know World Bank, but can you tell us a little bit more about BIS and its growing role in Asia Pacific?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for this question. Well, you know, the BIS is the oldest international financial institution. It's a very important institution. I would say it has a little bit of a more discrete profile than the World Bank and the IMF, but it's quite important. Basically, the BIS is the result of the desire of collaborate and cooperate between central banks. Our shareholders are primarily are uniquely central banks. We have 63 central bank members. Of course, Bank of Indonesia is a very important member of our institution. The BIS started in 1930. We started with 6 central banks, but since then it has been reinvented itself. It has kept up with adjusting its mandate. But I would say that at this stage there are 3 key issues that the BIS does. One is the BIS, I would say, is the premier fora for collaboration and cooperation in monetary and financial issues around the world. In monetary policy, there is no question that central banks are really at the center. And we also know that in a globalized world, there is a lot of interdependency. There are a lot of aspects that, if decided in one country, can affect others. Therefore, this dialogue, this constant dialogue, is very important. We have a very hands-on approach. Central banks are really involved here. Every 2 months, we gather pretty much all the central bank members here in Basel. So that tells you that 6 times a year, under normal circumstances, not with COVID, they would come here to Basel. So you can see the degree of commitment into this. Also, you might have heard of the Basel core principles for banking and so on and so forth. So the key regulatory aspects for the global financial system are decided in committees and bodies that are hosted here by the BIS, like the Basel Committee on Bank Supervision, and even the FSB is hosted here with us. For this type of meetings and decisions, we also invite bank supervisors to some of our meetings. So this is one very important chapter. The other important chapter of activity of the BIS is that we do many of the banking transactions for the central banks. As you well know, central banks hold an important amount of international reserves. They have to administer them, and therefore we have a very important operation, very discrete operation, but a very important operation for the central banks. And the third pillar, the newest pillar, has been technological development and innovation. Really, for the last years, innovation have become a constant. Financial systems have also been evolving through time, but the speed at which data can be managed, data can be transformed, has been so amazing that it really has asked for a rethink of financial systems and how to incorporate the innovation and technology into financial aspects, including the provision of money. And there are many economies of scale in learning and in developing ideas for the central banks. And that's why the BIS has developed a very important force of innovation through our BIS innovation hubs. And also we have created a very important network of experts from all the central banks. So that's in a nutshell what we do. We have a presence in different continents. In Asia, since 1996, we have an office in Hong Kong. This Hong Kong office supports us in all our activity in Asia. Asia was the first area other than Basel where we had a footprint, just because of the importance of Asia. Not only in the global economy, but also in terms of the importance of the central banks eradicated in Asia. Eventually, we opened an office in Mexico City, not because I'm Mexican, this was before my time, but also the Americas is an important area. We also, our two BIS innovation hubs, centers were open in Asia, one in Hong Kong, the other in Singapore. But the idea is for these centers to cater and to bring together all the different activities, all the different activities in Asia. So we're very happy to have our engagement with Asia. We have a renewed effort in the Asia office for the last 2 or 3 years. Our motto has been, we want to bring more of Basel to Asia, but also more of Asia to Basel. And I think that this has worked very well for us.
Very interesting. More Basel to Asia and more Asia to Basel. That's a very interesting topic. And yeah, this is I can imagine that during its longest existence, BIS has a very important role in many in the international monetary system. For instance, like it has helped the world to recover from the Second World War. Now, my colleague Dzulfiqar has some burning questions about the global trend of inflation today and the growing interest towards digital currency. Over to you, Dzulfiqar.
Thank you, Sawitri, and hi to you, Agustin. It's very nice to meet you, although we're not meeting in person. So I have a couple of questions related to global risk. To get a start, first, I want to ask you, what are the top risks that central banks, especially the ones in emerging markets, face amid the policy normalization pursued by central banks amid the global recovery this year?
Well, that's a key question. As I have mentioned, the BIS has been evolving to time, and what we try to do more than anything is to identify what are the key challenges that the different central banks face in their day-to-day business, and also looking forward. Needless to say, and as Adisti and yourself mentioned, the pandemic has conditioned a lot of what the central banks have been focusing during the last 2 years. Certainly 2 years ago, the key aspect was how to prevent the global pandemic that generated a huge slowdown in economic activity, for it not to generate a financial crisis, and that required huge amounts of liquidity provision. That I think so far worked really well. Obviously, each country had to do whatever they needed to do in their own economies. Coordination with the Ministry of Finance. And by the way, Indonesia has done a tremendously good job. I think the coordination between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank in Indonesia has been very well, with two tremendously skilled economists, Indrawati and Peri Wanjario, both very good friends and very admirable persons. So the issue is right now is once the pandemic sort of seems to be entering into a more controllable phase, is how to bring back some of the liquidity expansion that was generated, so to prevent a major rise in inflation. We have seen already in some countries some inflation surprises. Most of it, I think, should be considered transitory. In the US, we have seen already inflation get all the way to 8%, 7-8%. Now that will require for the US and other advanced economies to gradually increase their interest rates, as their governors have pointed out. And given the importance of global liquidity, that will affect also emerging market central banks. I mean, central banks in emerging markets, of course, need to worry about inflation. And again, each one is facing their own problems because local conditions are also important. But I would say that for emerging markets as a whole, they were able to implement aggressive monetary policies started 2 years ago, just because the level of interest rates around the world economy was low or was falling. But now, when interest rates are going to go up, they will have to start tightening also monetary policy to prevent instability in their exchange rate market, and also to rein in inflationary pressures. A key aspect is to prevent destabilizing capital outflows. And therefore, I think that this process of them themselves normalizing will be very important. Timing here is of the essence, because at the same time, you don't want inflationary pressures to creep up, but at the same time, you don't want to affect unduly the recovery of economic activity. And so there is this balance that needs to be taken place.
All right, so you mentioned about time as an essence here. I want to ask whether central banks right now are on the right track on their policy normalization, or do you think that central banks, especially in the emerging markets, should tighten monetary policy sooner than initially expected?
Yes, that's a very important question. Traditionally, we have to, I have to say that the transmission of inflationary forces in emerging markets is faster than in advanced economies. So they respond more to commodity price increases, but also given that their markets are thinner and investments in their own countries are a little bit more volatile, they tend to reflect inflationary pressures and expectations of higher interest rate faster. So that traditionally has called for emerging markets starting to act a little bit ahead of the time of advanced economies, even in anticipation of tighter monetary policy in advanced economies. So we have seen already several central banks in emerging markets taking prompt and opportune decisions. Some central banks in Latin America, for example, started tightening monetary policy since mid last year. Others have come afterwards. In Asia, we have seen already a couple of central banks taking some decisions. So it is sort of common for emerging markets to act relatively quickly because they have, to some extent, a little bit of less degrees of freedom than advanced economies central banks.
All right, great. Now I want to move on to CBDC. Data from the BIS shows that there are at least 3 live retail CBDCs, 28 pilot projects, and 68 central banks have communicated publicly about their CBDC work. Now, I want to ask you, how long does the BIS expect for the central banks to actually implement the CBDCs, if at all? And does the timeline vary between emerging economies and developed ones?
Well, that's a very important question. I mean, I think CBDC is really an attempt by central banks to do today what they have been doing all the time, which is to provide the best representation of money possible. As you can see from an historical perspective, money or cash have evolved from, coins of metal to paper money. Now we're in the digital age through digital representation. One thing that central banks need to make sure is that the system works flawlessly. I mean, one thing that we cannot afford is to say that today you cannot use your money because the system is down. That's an excuse that central bankers cannot afford. That requires to handle millions and millions of transactions per minute. It implies having a tremendously resilient system from the point of view of cybersecurity and cyber resiliency too. It also requires to reach all the parts in the country. I mean, for example, in Indonesia, with the amount of, with the huge territory you have and the tremendous amount of island you have, the challenge to bring a CBDC is a big one, you know. So you really have to take into account all these degrees of freedom and take into account that central banks cannot fail in this aspect. So I think that this is a project where it's much better to do it right than to do it fast. And as you can imagine, there are already, and as you know, there are already some countries that have rolled out CBDCs. This has happened mostly in small economies, but we also have the case of China, which is very, very, very specific, very particular. So the key issue here is that it's not a simple decision, because also CBDC have an important impact on the economy and the financial system. So my own point is that hopefully in the next years, we will see different examples of countries jumping into CBDC more decisively. I would say that there is huge amounts of resources and intelligence being invested into CBDC. There are very important decisions at the local level that each country needs to make. I mean, is CBDC going to be an account-based system, or will it be a token-based system? Will the central banks have accounts for every single individual or not? How do you deal with the transactions of foreigners? How do you deal with cross-border transactions with CBDCs? So there is a lot of coordination to be done, and that's the role where also the BIS is playing a very important role.
While China has put digital yuan on trial, but some countries, including Indonesia, has yet to start a pilot project, right? While at the same time, private players have continued a rapid development in digital money and payments, with central banks lagging behind the private players. Does this have any serious risk on the role of central banks going forward? And how are you concerned about this?
Well, I would question the premise that central banks are falling behind private players. I mean, I would say, for example, that a lot of what is called private money is today, and you know, we really don't realize that is private money. For example, is when if you have a bank account with a local bank and you do an electronic transfer, that at the end of the day has a very close connection with central bank money. Central bank digital money right now is in pretty much all the countries represented by the reserves that central banks hold in the central bank. And those reserves, the exchange of those reserves, are the ones who allow these fast payment systems or these transfers in commercial banks, and in some cases also with the payment service providers, to work pretty much 24/7 instant payments. That is with local currency. Now, the main difference between CBDC and this type representation of private money is the fact that the issuer is a commercial bank and not a central bank. And that has an important difference. But we have also to realize that behind the commercial bank money, the central bank is there, you know. Today, I would say that the vast majority of electronic transactions is done with this type of electronic private money. And we shouldn't give up on this. I think that there is still many more things to be done in developing this type of private electronic money. And central banks will continue to work in this respect. Now, there are also very, how would I say it, very noticeable expressions of alternative money, like you know, cryptocurrencies or stable coins. But the vast majority of these, and I would say pretty much all of them, have not been able to replace money. You don't see many prices in pretty much any country expressed in some of these currencies, in Bitcoin and so on and so forth. Why? Because it's money that is not widely available. Second, its value is extremely volatile. And therefore, given that the volatility of it's not a good store of value, and therefore it also cannot be a good unit of account. Therefore, yes, something that has been quite noticeable, and that's something that, of course, we central banks have it very close in our thoughts, is the fact that cryptocurrencies and stablecoins have been developing very fast. They have become quite popular, but more than anything, as an investment alternative, as a speculative asset, and not so much in its role of replacing fiat money issued by central banks. That is also replicated through electronic money that is provided by the commercial banking system. No, so we have learned a lot from cryptocurrencies and stablecoins. I mean, we have to be honest about it. I think that these efforts to apply technology has been very innovative, have contributed a lot in our own thinking. Therefore, I mean, what we want to do as central banks is to learn what is going on in the technology field and find the best applications of them for financial markets, and we are doing so. No, so but again, I think that central bank money dominates the landscape in all the economy, and I think this will continue to be the case, because there is only one thing that there is one key aspect for money in a local economy to play its role as effective money, and that is the trust that is required, the trust that you have on the preservation of the value of the currency, and the fact that when you want to pay or you want to transform it into savings or into the purchase of a good or service, that purchasing power will be preserved, and that the only thing that guarantees that is the central bank actions.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. So I see that the BIS Innovation Hub is launching several initiatives regarding CBDCs this year. Now, can you tell us more about these initiatives, and how can Asia Pacific countries like Indonesia benefit from that initiatives?
Yes, of course. I mean, one of the things that we do in our innovation hub is to develop ideas, to explore with technology, and out of these exercises, we come out with proof of concepts that we try to make them as generic as possible so that each central bank can learn from it. This, I think, is very important, because it's much better that as a central banking community, we do all these efforts and share the products of those efforts than each central bank having to go and do the research by itself. No, it's done in a much faster, more efficient way. At the end of the day, as I have mentioned already, the national solution for CBDC will be unique to each country. There is no one size fits all, and therefore each central banks will have to consider the way their monetary regime is established, the relationship with central banks, the availability of interconnectedness, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, for the local application, I would say from this common knowledge, a lot can be contributed through the BIS. But I would say that where the most important contribution of the BIS can be is in the interconnection, and not only local international interconnection, but also interconnection through different payment systems domestically. I would say we have in front of us a unique opportunity to develop a system of digital money based on central bank currency that would be very, very efficient, that would be very secure, and that would reduce dramatically the transaction costs. Something that Indonesia has put very high in its agenda in the G20 is precisely how to reduce the transaction costs and the costs and the reach of remittances, both internationally and domestic ones. And the key here is interoperability and interconnection. Therefore, many of our projects in the Innovation Hub has to do with interconnection and interoperability, because these really are the key components that can allow, a remittance from any country to Indonesia, instead of taking several days with very high costs, to be done instantaneously with very low cost. So I think those are the objectives, and I think there is where we have a comparative advantage. And again, Indonesia is a tremendously important emerging market, given its territory, given its presence in Asia, and also I think that in terms of financial inclusion, something that is very dear also for Indonesia, CBDC and CBDC-related efforts can be very important to accelerate financial inclusion. So we hope that we can make an important contribution in this line too.
All right. So you mentioned about Indonesian presidency for the G20 this year. I want to ask, does the BIS has any specific or particular expectations on the outcome as the Central Bank of Indonesia plans to discuss about CBDC during this year's G20 forum?
Well, I mean, I'm very impressed with the way Indonesia has framed this G20 year, their presidency. I think that the main phrase that sort of captures the challenge that we face in the moment is perfect. This motto of recover together and recover stronger. I think that's what we need right now. Also, the three pillars are also very well thought out. Global health architecture. Health has been a very important, has been a conditioning element in the development of the world economy. And therefore, we cannot, as finance ministries and central bank governors, we cannot abstract from health issues. And therefore, this is very, very important. The other is sustainable energy transition. I think that's also very important because, well, of course, we face the urgent need to address climate change. And even today, we see how the high energy prices is affecting inflation, and part of the high energy prices have to do with this energy transition. Therefore, for us to think about that is very important. And then digital transformation, because this is changing our world. There is tremendous force in innovation. Now that force can be very, very productive, but it also can be very disruptive. And therefore, to provide the adequate framework for the digital transformation to take place is of the essence. And that's what we have been talking about in terms of what the BIS can do, no? In digital transformation, it's not only CBDC, but it's also green financing, it's also, for example, other forms of financial infrastructure, is RegTech, SubTech, is trade finance. Therefore, it has broad application, the digital transformation in the field of central banking and the financial system. So I think that the strategic plan for the Indonesia's presidency has been very well thought out, and I'm looking forward. And I think that we as a BIS can make an important contribution in the different chapters. I mean, in particular, for example, in energy transformation, right now, and here also government PERI has been very important in the realm of the Asian Consultative Council of the BIS in terms of the launching of our Asian Green Bond initiative, where basically we are issuing some bonds that are green bonds. At the end of the day, is financing for helping the fight against climate change, that are suitable to be part of the reserves, international reserves of central banks. So through this, basically, we're facilitating tremendously central banks to invest in green bonds. And we are issuing our Asian green bond initiative in a couple of weeks, and that is very important in the context also of all the efforts in the G20. We're also helping, working with the Asian Development Bank to promote the issuance of these green bonds. And in terms of the digital transformation, cross-border payments are very important. Indonesia has been pursuing this, supporting this very intensely. There is a working group of the FSB that has 19 chapters. The BIS is contributing in 11 of them. So you can see the degree of involvement of the BIS in the development of deliverables that the Indonesia G20 presidency implies.
All right. Yeah, that's it from me. So thank you, Agustin. I believe Sawitri has a couple of things to say. Over to you, Sawitri.
Indonesia and I think many emerging economies in Asia, I think are currently struggling to finance their energy transition. And I think this is actually a very good opportunity that the countries can use. The Asian green bond funds would be certainly beneficial for energy transition programs in the region. So we are looking forward to seeing the fund in reality, Agustin. So this is a very good initiative. And also many things about the digital currency. So, for instance, Agustin, do you think that just like what happened to the world has transitioned between the gold standard to paper money? So, do you think that in the future we should embrace the possibility that probably paper money will be replaced by digital money as the main means of financial transactions worldwide?
Well, my own personal opinion is that central banks should always give that option to people. People should have the option to decide if they want electronic money or physical money, like paper-based or coin-based money. At the end of the day, it's also important to have resiliency. Again, as I emphasized in some of the questions I addressed a few minutes ago. It's important that we have a resilient system, but no system is infallible. So I think it's important to have the backup of the possibility of using cash. So I mean, I think I would think of digital money more as a complement and rather a substitute for a cash-based system.
Okay, thank you, Agustin. I think that will be my last question. This has been a great and eye-opening conversation. We look forward to seeing BIS engagement in Asia Pacific.
Certainly, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I wish Indonesia the best in this year. And I'm sure that the G20 presidency for Indonesia will be extremely fruitful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Agustin. Folks, that was our interview with Agustin Carstens, the General Manager of Bank for International Settlements. Stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy your day.